You might need to adjust, I don't know if we need to, so we will get started with our program. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace to everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us. This is an important initiative that we have launched, and we really appreciate all of you joining us to learn more about this. As is our tradition, we start our program with the recitation of the Holy Quran, and I would request Saud Iqbal to come and recite a few verses.
Peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. I'll recite a verse of the Holy Quran in the original Arabic, followed by its English translation. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. من أجل ذلك كتبنا على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا ولقد جاءتهم رسولنا بالبينات ثم إن كثيرا منهم بعد ذلك في الأرض لمسرفون. Translation. I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. On account of this, we prescribed for the children of Israel that whosoever killed a person, unless it be for killing a person or for creating disorder in the land, it shall be as if he had killed all of mankind. And whosoever gave life to one, it shall be as if he had given life to all of mankind. And our messengers came to them with clear signs, yet even after that, many of them committed excess in the land.
Thank you. So, before we get into the program, just, and I introduce myself, just a point of some housekeeping. Anytime, this is an informal sitting, anytime feel free to take a break, grab some more food. In fact, the way we judge how good our food tastes is by the number of times our guests go for seconds. So please feel free to do that anytime while the presentations are going on. We have a brief program today, a little less than an hour, and I will start. I'll be your host. My name is Fazan Paul. I am the Director of Public Affairs for the Virginia chapter of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. I will start out by giving you a very brief introduction about our community. Some of the guests here are familiar, and this may be a little bit of repetition, but there are some new faces I see. So I will ask, yes, thank you, sir. So the Ahmadiyya Muslim community was founded by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian back in 1889. He claimed to be the promised reformer of this age, and this is a key distinguishing factor of our community, of our Muslim community. We believe in Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad as the Messiah of this age. Let's go to the next slide. This slide shows a growth of our community from its start in 1889 all the way now. We are established in over 200 countries. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community, in fact, is the largest organized Muslim community under one leadership, the Khalifa, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad. And this slide shows that the spread of our community in the United States. We are, like I said, one of the largest and one of the oldest organized communities in the United States. We were established back in 1920 when our first missionary came to the United States. And we have been holding inter-religious dialogue, humanitarian activities throughout the United States and across the world. With that brief introduction, I think I'm going to introduce our speaker, but before we do that, we are here for the launch of the True Islam and the Extremist campaign. As I mentioned, our community has launched a number of different initiatives around Muslims and their role in Western society. And this is our latest initiative. In fact, it is the culmination, to some extent, of all of the different initiatives that we've done in the past, and we'll cover that briefly after our keynote speaker. But as a way of introducing this campaign, I'm going to ask a brief video to be played. This video goes into the launch of this campaign in Capitol Hill just a few weeks ago. And that kind of gives you a little background.
The Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA held its 6th annual Day on the Hill and 10th annual National Public Affairs Seminar on February 26th to the 27th. Approximately 70 delegates from 55 chapters attended the two-day event. This year, the group announced its True Islam and the Extremists campaign on US Capitol Hill. The launch took place in the prestigious Gold Room of the Rayburn Building, where more than 100 guests attended, including staff from congressional offices, NGOs, local, city, and state officials, members of law enforcement, and faith leaders. The event's highlight was the strong bipartisan participation of 7 members of U.S. Congress and a senior member of the U.S. State Department, all of whom publicly announced their support of the community's unprecedented effort to combat terrorism and improve national security. The True Islam campaign uses the Quran and Prophet Muhammad's example to effectively rebut 11 common misconceptions about Islam that extremists use to radicalize youth. These 11 points include Islam's correct view on freedom of speech, religious freedom, and women's rights. Amjad Mahmood Khan, the event's MC and National Public Affairs Secretary for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA, noted that San Bernardino County Police Chief Jared Burguan was the first among to support the True Islam campaign when the campaign launched in late December 2015. The 2 co-chairs of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Caucus, Congresswoman Jackie Speer and Congressman Ted Poe, talked about the importance of the True Islam campaign in countering extremist ideology.
Your campaign of True Islam is truly a gift to all of us, because we need to rid this country of the ignorance that is being sown by ISIS and so many other groups, and frankly, even some politicians. And what I love so much about the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is that you do not flinch. You are not fearful.
What a contrast. Here you have ISIS that thrives on 2 words: hate and violence. And you have the Ahmadiyya community that thrives on peace and tolerance.
Congressman Mike Honda of California commended the Ahmadiyya Muslim community for answering the call of President Obama in uniting against ISIS.
Everything you have set out is, in terms of your precepts, really reflect the principles of the Constitution of the United States. And I'm very, very proud to be one of your supporters.
Representative Steve Stivers of Ohio showed his support for the campaign while honoring the memory of one of his constituents, Dr. Qamar, an Ahmadi Muslim who was martyred for his belief in Pakistan.
It's a great message. It's a message America needs to hear. It's a message the world needs to hear. I commend you on what you're doing. I can tell you, I know your community has suffered for your beliefs. A constituent of mine, Dr. Kumar, was murdered in cold blood. Thank you for what you do. We stand with you and are here to support you.
Representative Pete Aguilar, whose district includes San Bernardino County, came out in support of the True Islam campaign.
And I want to fully subscribe to what you are here to do, the True Islam campaign, pushing back against hateful rhetoric.
Given the current Islamophobic rhetoric, Representative Judy Chu vowed to speak out against the voices of hate.
We must never forget the lessons learned from World War II when we wrongfully imprisoned innocent people. We must never use fear as an excuse to harm innocent people. We must stand up to hate and make sure that our voices are there against xenophobia and racism. They have no place in our country.
Representative Al Green of Texas passionately spoke about the need for justice for Islam.
Because I stand in solidarity with the Muslim community. I stand in solidarity with you for justice for Islam. Justice for Islam. No religion condones the taking of innocent human life. No religion condones this. Islam speaks for truth and justice and freedom and equality. Islam is a religion of peace.
This campaign is vitally important, remarked Brian Bachman, Director of the Office of International Religious Freedom at the U.S. State Department.
It is not for the U.S. government to say what is true Islam and what is not, what makes a good Muslim and what is not. But we definitely want that debate to be happening within the Muslim community. We don't have the credibility to state that. You do. And we rely upon you to make that case.
In addition to the formal launch event, delegates participated in more than 110 meetings at the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. State, where they briefed many members of Congress and their staff about the True Islam campaign. Sania Ahmed, MTA News.
With that introduction, now I would like to ask our Imam Rizwan Khan, to come and discuss a little bit more about the True Islam campaign.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The purpose of the launch of this True Islam campaign has to do not only with the religion of Islam and with Muslims, but it has to do with extremism in general, which is something that is relevant to all of us, whether we are Muslims or Christians or Jews or atheists or the adherents of any religion or the adherents of no religion at all. The reason is because extremism is something that is a common phenomenon in all societies, in all cultures. And unfortunately, extremism has a way of polarizing society. It usually does not exist in isolation, but it's like a magnetic force that needs a polar opposite. And those two polar opposites begin to feed off of one another and continue to grow and escalate. And so it is a responsibility of those who are the moderate majority to not remain silent in those situations and to prevent society from spiraling into what history has given witness of as being great and catastrophic events. What we see presently happening right now with extremism in the world is that on one end we see groups like ISIS, Muslim terrorists, extremists, and they're putting forward a message that is meant to create fear, to terrorize people. And not only putting forward that message, but doing acts of terror that, although comparatively they are small as compared to other catastrophes that happen in the world. But the number of people that die in other wars and battles far exceed the type of damage that terrorists are able to inflict. But the reason why their work is unfortunately so effective is because it creates terror along with that loss of life and along with that damage. And so the result is that on the opposite end of the extreme, there is also a polarization happening, where people who are afraid of terrorists are allowing that fear to get the better of them, to take over their intellect, and allow them to make decisions and be carried away by emotions, and be taken advantage of with fear. The irony in all of this is that those people who are on opposite polar ends of extremes actually find a common cause, which is that they feed off of one another. ISIS, for example, is a very small group, and their media wing, or whatever their efforts are and whatever their capacities are to propagate their message, are very limited. But the reason why we all know about ISIS, and we all know about Muslim extremism, is because it is something that is constantly brought forward to us by the media, because they are given a podium and a loudspeaker from which to broadcast their message. And the irony is that those people who broadcast their message the most are those people who are the most Islamophobic. Those people who are appealing to a population and a crowd who are most fearful of Islamic extremism and who are most carried away by that emotion. And so what happens is that those who are Muslim extremists on one end and Islamophobic on the other end are actually putting forward the same interpretation of Islam, and they have found common cause in this perspective. And so that is one of the reasons why we see the ideology of ISIS being something that is promoted, something that is validated most by not Muslim extremists, but those who are most opposed to Islam and those who are most Islamophobic. The reason why this happens is because extremes rely on each other. Two polar opposites always have to live in a type of symbiosis with each other, and their existence depends on one another. There has to be some fear, some common enemy that we have to justify the existence of the other. If it weren't for people who are Islamophobic, for people who wish to destroy Islam, then ISIS would have nothing with which they can create havoc in society with. They would have nothing by which to motivate people to join their ranks. And on the other end, if there weren't some kind of extremism that people are afraid of, then those who are on the other extreme, those who are Islamophobic or whatever group they belong to, they also would not be able to appeal to any fear and latent terror that exists in the hearts of people. Now, our responsibility as the moderate majority is to be the voice of the moderate majority. Because when the moderate majority becomes silent, then the only voice that's left is the shouting of the extremists. And when that is the only voice that is left, then they dominate the dialogue of our society. And this is something that we slowly see our society unfortunately inching towards. Our national dialogue, when it comes to issues related to extremism, is unfortunately not one that is based on reasoning, on knowledge, on intellect. But unfortunately it has become more and more driven by emotion, by fear, by xenophobia sometimes. And now such statements are being made and are becoming common, which perhaps years ago, perhaps decades ago, were things that we thought that as a society we had overcome long ago. We had grown out of. It was something of the past, and never could we return to such ignorance because we were now more educated and enlightened than our dark past. However, what we sometimes underestimate is the power of human nature to move towards destruction at times. And so that fight against extremism is something that is common to us all. Now the reason why the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has launched the True Islam campaign is because this extremism that we seek to address is a type of extremism that is something that falls as our responsibility to address. But there are many types of extremism. There's nationalism, there's patriotism that goes too far, there's racism which goes too far as well, to a point that it starts to oppress people. And whenever those types of extremes come up, where people, because of their patriotism, go to a point of nationalism, and then it perhaps escalates into potentially becoming fascism, then it's the responsibility of the people of that country to address that extremism. We can't come from outside and then address the fascism or the patriotism or the nationalism that is happening there, because then people would suspect us of having mixed intentions. Then also when it comes to racism, if there's racism happening by people of my race or of someone else's race, then it's the primary responsibility of the people of that race to address that problem. If people are being racist against me, then if I address it, it might come off as if I have mixed intentions. But those people of that race themselves are the ones that are first responsible, and their words are most effective in regards to countering that extremism. So when it comes to Muslim extremism and extremism and interpretation of Islam, the reason why this True Islam and the extremist campaign has been launched by Muslims is because we recognize that that responsibility falls primarily on us, and that Muslims have to be the flag bearers when it comes to countering Muslim extremism and extremist interpretations of Islam. However, our purpose in this campaign is not something that is selfish. It is not something that has only to do with Muslims, but it is something that has to do with countering every form of extremism. Because when it is allowed to flourish in our society without being answered, when it is allowed to be the sole voice that dominates the dialogue of our country, then that is when slowly we, without realizing it, move more and more towards extremism. And unfortunately what we see in history is that there were societies that were very enlightened, very progressive, people who thought that they were far beyond any kind of extremism or ignorance. But slowly they inched towards that extremism until they began taking part in actions complicitly that are remembered as great atrocities in history. Now I'd like to go over briefly the 11 points of the True Islam campaign and how these 11 points cut at the very roots of extremism. The fact is that those who are extremists, they seek to present an interpretation of Islam which misleads those who are politically desperate, particularly those who belong to the youth, young men especially, and it seeks to radicalize them. Those people who find themselves in a situation where they have no solution, where they feel themselves cornered, going into almost a fight or flight type of mentality, they are in desperate need for something that appeals to them. And so such misinterpretations of Islam are possible and are there as a means of radicalizing people because of ignorance that is prevalent. And so one of the best ways to counter extremism is education, because the best way to counter ignorance is with knowledge and education. The first point in the True Islam campaign is that Islam wholly rejects all forms of terrorism. And this is something that has repeatedly been mentioned in the Holy Quran, that any type of the creation of disorder in the earth is something that is strongly and strictly forbidden by the teachings of Islam. Not only that, but it was according to the rules of warfare that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, established in his lifetime, that the killing of civilians was something that was strictly forbidden. Only battle was allowed on the battlefield, and there also it was only allowed in defensive warfare, as will be covered in the next point. The second point is that True Islam believes in non-violent jihad of the self and of the pen. Here, what the Holy Quran clearly teaches is that warfare is only allowed, as far as Islam is concerned and as far as the Holy Quran is concerned, in self-defense. And not only that, but the jihad of the Holy Quran that is referred to as a very specific type of self-defense. Self-defense against religious oppression. And here also it is not referred to religious oppression against Muslims, but the Quran refers to this permission to fight being given, because were it not given, then mosques, synagogues, cloisters, churches, all places of worship would have been torn down. And people would have never had the freedom to worship and to have the inalienable right of freedom of religion. So the permission to fight in the Holy Quran is given in defense of the religious freedoms of all peoples, not just Muslims. And there is a religious responsibility of a Muslim that when they see the religious rights of people being oppressed and them being deprived of their inalienable human rights, and the jihad of the Holy Quran calls on them to defend those rights. And only in that context. There is no other jihad that is permitted in the Holy Quran. In this day and age, since the religious freedoms of Muslims are not being deprived by any imperial power, by the Western countries as well, even when there is somewhat of an imperialistic foreign policy, it has primarily to do with economic gains. Never do Western countries ever oppress the religious freedoms of Muslim countries. And so even if there is a war and there is a deprivation of rights happening, they are based on political differences. But according to the definition of Islam, since the religious freedoms of people are always preserved, even in the countries that some people say are colonized by our countries, even there, firstly and foremost, religious freedom is established by our countries. And so that concept of religious jihad is something that simply does not apply in this day and age according to the definition of the Holy Quran. The only attacks that are being made on Islam are by the pen, by arguments. And so it is a responsibility of Muslims to wage jihad of the pen, which Allah Almighty has spoken of when He says that La ikraha fid deen, there is no compulsion in religion, and the reason is that قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ, that truth has become distinct from falsehood. When a person is forced to abandon argument and go to violence, it means that in that very action he has failed in his arguments, and he does not have sufficient reason to prove his case, and now he has resorted to violence and forcing others to agree to his opinion. The third point is that a true Islam believes in the equality, education, and empowerment of women. And here, what's important to remember is that Islam has not allowed for any of the gender oppression that we see that's happening in many societies. Now, this sort of idea that is many times attributed to the religion of Islam is unfortunately done so because of cultural norms that exist in particular societies that happen to be Muslim countries. But when we look at actual Muslim countries, we see that the diversity and the divergence in interpretation of Islam is so great that to interpret a religion based on the actions of its followers is something that can never lead to correct conclusions. For example, on one end we have countries like Saudi Arabia, where they completely confine their women and do not even give them basic human rights at sometimes. And that applies to Afghanistan and the rule under the Taliban as well. Then there are other countries like Turkey, and perhaps Indonesia as well, which are extremely liberal in their interpretation of Islam, and they give rights to women that perhaps have not even been found in Western countries up until now. In fact, one of the examples that is often given is that Muslim countries have had far more Muslim women heads of state than Western countries have, particularly the United States. So, to gauge a religion by the actions of its followers is something that can never lead to any single conclusion, because the followers of religions are so different in their interpretation of their religion, and many times it is politically motivated. So what the religion of Islam teaches, what the Holy Quran teaches, is that men and women have a different role when it comes to society, when it comes to the family structure. However, they are equal in their reward from Allah Almighty, and they are equal in their opportunity for empowerment and education. No person can deprive women of their right to education and empowerment, and there is no compulsion in religion in this area. Then, the fourth point is that true Islam advocates the freedom of conscience and religion and speech. Freedom of conscience is something that to an extent has been covered, that any person who is deprived of their freedom of conscience and prevented from practicing their religion, that it is the responsibility of Muslims and their religious responsibility to defend their freedom of conscience. It is not just that Muslims are required to defend only Muslims. We are not permitted to be selfish in defending injustice. But also freedom of religion and freedom of speech is something that is very important as well. It is an issue that has recently arisen because of the Charlie Hebdo attacks and other things that happen in the world. What the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, is that he never punished anyone for criticizing him or committing blasphemy against him or God Almighty. Rather, throughout his life, he was insulted repeatedly. He was constantly the object of criticism, and the most mean and the most vile insults, in fact, were hurled against him throughout his life. Still, he never retaliated to that type of language. In fact, he always forgave people who behaved in this way towards him. And so the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, demonstrates the freedom of speech that he established in his own society. The examples that are sometimes quoted by people who seek to reinterpret the teachings of Islam and the Holy Quran are extremely obscure examples. There are two examples, one of Abu Afak and another individual, that are found in very weak narrations. And then a third example of Ka'b bin Ashraf, who people claim was executed or murdered because of his criticism of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. And this also is an example of someone who was not guilty of criticizing the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, per se, but someone who was guilty of war crimes and inciting war against the Muslims. What these examples demonstrate is a consistent strand that we see in the arguments that are put forward by extremists, which is that for the most part they rely on extremely weak narrations or contradictory narrations, but they always contradict the Holy Quran and the established practice of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. And what we see there is that freedom of speech was something that was always preserved, and those people who criticized him were forgiven en masse whenever he was given authority over them. True Islam, the fifth point, advocates separation of mosque and state. This is a point that many times people have apprehension of, that perhaps if Muslims come to power or if the majority of the United States become Muslims, then will Sharia law be enforced onto people? What we see in the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, is that he was not a dictator, nor did he come to power by virtue of his being a prophet of God. He was a democratically elected leader who came to power in a state that was not even majority Muslim. When he migrated to Medina, the Medina had 5 tribes that lived there, 3 of whom were Jewish and 2 were idolatrous. And at the time of his migration, most of the idolatrous tribes had converted to Islam, but many of them still remained in idolatry. And all 3 of the Jewish tribes remained in Judaism. But still, even though there was a minority population of Muslims in Medina, but by democracy and by the consensus of the people, he came to power. This is something that is also established by the teachings of Islam, where the Holy Quran says that right to rule is something that is the right of the people. And there is a trust that is described, which they give to the person who is most deserving of it. So their monarchy is completely ruled out. A birthright towards leadership is ruled out. And then also Allah Almighty says, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, that their matters are decided by mutual consultation. The possibility of dictatorship is also completely ruled out. So the system that Islam puts forward is something that is democratic, where the right to rule is not a religious right that any individual has, but it is the right of the people that they give to a person from among them who is most deserving in their understanding, and it is referred to as a trust. Then also the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, established a federal and a state government in his city, where he established a federal government and a basic constitution that preserved the inalienable human rights of all people and that were based on secular principles. And then within each state within his government, there was 3 Jewish states and those 3 Jewish tribes, and then 2 tribes that were the idolatrous tribes that later became Muslim. Each tribe had their own individual and local state rights, and the Jewish tribes were given the right to decide their cases according to Jewish law. So the same system of federal and state government that we see in the United States was established by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, 1400 years ago. And also we see that those religious laws of Islam were never enforced in society, even on Muslims, but only secular laws are things that are permitted to be enacted in society through democracy and through the majority consensus of society. So the principles that Islam has put forward are in principle in consistency with the United States Constitution, and also with the ideals of basic human rights that we see around us as well. So those principles that our countries here in the West have recently adopted after coming out of monarchy a couple of 100 years ago were things that were established by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, centuries ago. And in this way, true Islam is something that no one has any right to be fearful of, even on a government level. And true Islam believes in loyalty to country, and we see this as being a command of the Holy Quran, where God Almighty says that, O ye who believe, obey Allah and obey the Prophet, and obey those in authority among you. And those in authority among you are those who have been made rulers among you. And we see this in the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him as well. So long as he lived in Mecca for 13 years, he obeyed the government of the time in those areas that did not infringe on his human rights and his right to freedom of religion. And he never committed any kind of mutiny or rebellion against his country. But he was always loyal to his country, and even when he was leaving the city of Mecca, he expressed great sorrow at the fact that he was forced to the point of persecution to have to migrate elsewhere. And had it not been for that, then he would never have left the city of Mecca. Then also the 7th point is that true Islam encompasses universal declaration of human rights, which is that, again, all types of disorder, all types of racism, everything that goes against the basic human rights that our people, we as a people establish on the basis of our conscience, are things that are found in the teachings of the Holy Quran and are encompassed in every way according to the teachings of Islam. And the 8th point is that true Islam believes in all verses of the Holy Quran and forbids lying. This is also an important point for us to remember when we counter extremism, which is that extremists have a common argument that they always have to use to justify their interpretations of the Quran. And that is that every extreme interpretation of the Holy Quran requires that an individual cancel out certain verses of the Holy Quran. That they say that certain verses of the Quran cancel other verses of the Holy Quran. This is the only way a violent interpretation of Islam is possible. And this is a common argument put forward by extremists on both sides, whether Islamophobes or ISIS and Islamic extremists. The reason is that an extremist interpretation of the Holy Quran is not possible without contradicting the Holy Quran. And the Holy Quran has said clearly that this is a perfect book, there is no doubt in it. And that if it had come from anyone other than the all-knowing God, then you would have found great contradictions in it. So to interpret the Holy Quran in a way that contradicts itself and that cancels out certain verses is an interpretation that the Holy Quran itself has said has no value and no validity. And so a proper understanding of the Holy Quran and education on the Holy Quran is one of the best ways to counter extremism. Again, education is the best way to counter ignorance. The ninth point is that true Islam recognizes that no religion can monopolize on salvation, which means that the judgment is ultimately with God Almighty. There are many people who have never heard of the religion of Islam. There are many people who come under a category where, on a human level, we have no right to judge whether that person is going to heaven or hell. And so that door is always left open on an individual level. As a Muslim, a person cannot say that that person is definitely going to hell, or that entire group is a group that is certainly going to hell. This is a judgment that God has reserved only for himself. And also there are factors that the Holy Quran has described where a person may come under the category of innocence when it comes to rejecting the Prophet of God and the true Prophet of God. And so a monopoly on salvation is something that creates distance among people in society. And this dogma is something that, on a human level, is something that no person has the right to declare. It is something that only God Almighty has the right to declare. And the 10th point is that true Islam believes in the need for a unified Muslim leadership. And this is something that the Holy Quran has spoken of in the perspective of speaking of how division among Muslims and among any group of people is a means of their being weakened and also at times of a punishment that comes upon them. Because when there is division among people, then violence and extremism starts to take root. And this is something that we see in the history, unfortunately, of all religions. And so the best way to bring about peace and harmony among the followers of any religion is to have unified leadership. We see that so long as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, was the sole leader of Muslims, and the Khulafai Rashidin who came after him, then there was always peace in society, and there was always progress. And the spreading of that peace and universal human values and rights was something that continued at a faster and faster pace. But when that universal leadership left, then Muslims started to fall away from that unity and that moderation that was inbuilt into them. And so in this day and age, what we put forward is that there is a need again for that khilafat, which the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, prophesied as being established after him. And it is only through that unified leadership, when Muslims come under that unified understanding and divinely guided understanding of Islam, that true peace can be achieved. Otherwise, without unity, there is always the possibility of splinter groups and extremist groups coming up and carrying away many of the masses who are ignorant. And finally, the 11th point is that true Islam wholly rejects the concept of a bloody Messiah. And here what is meant is that any concept of a Messiah or a Mahdi who is to come in the latter days that will force people to change their religion and will kill people because of their religion is a concept that is inconsistent with the teachings of the Holy Quran. God Almighty has repeatedly said in the Holy Quran that there is only warfare that is allowed in self-defense. And also that as long as that war of self-defense continues from the opposition, only then it is permitted. When those who are attacking you for your religion cease, then it is also your responsibility to desist. And also the Holy Quran says that there is no compulsion in religion. Any interpretation of any narrations or any hadiths that are attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, or any scholar, which contradicts the teachings of the Holy Quran, is by the universally understood principles of Islam and by Muslims everywhere an illegitimate interpretation. And so the Holy Quran does not allow for any idea of a bloody Messiah who comes and punishes people and kills people and forces people to convert to a certain religion or convert to Islam. And so true Islam rejects this concept which sows division in the hearts of people and which creates a sort of superiority complex and also creates an idea that people have, which is to look down on others as being less human or as being those people who are worthy of death. So as long as this concept of a bloody Messiah exists, even if people work towards preserving the rights of others, But if they believe in their doctrine, that a Messiah will come who will start killing people for the sake of their religion, then in our doctrines we hold a view where on a certain level we condone violence against people for their religion. And we look upon people as being deserving of death because of the religion that they have chosen, and deserving of being forced into conversion. So this doctrine is also something that has no place in true Islam. It is something that contradicts the basic teachings of the Holy Quran. So in these 11 points, we as Muslims have taken the responsibility that is ours primarily, which we recognize as being ours primarily, in our universal and collective fight against extremism in every form. That form of extremism that we see coming up in Muslim and Islamic extremism through ISIS and any other group, to counter them ideologically is primarily the responsibility of us as Muslims, because we are Muslims. And so we fulfill that responsibility with that sense and that weight of responsibility by putting forward this campaign of True Islam. And so we invite you to join in that campaign, to support it and to endorse it and to join us in that fight against extremism. Not because you happen to be a Muslim, and not being a Muslim is not something that restricts an individual in any way, but because we find common cause in countering extremism in every form. And because we come to the mutual understanding together that if we allow extremism and extremist rhetoric to dominate the dialogue that is happening in our country, then it is something that, even if it does not affect us presently, will slowly start to creep into our society and into our own families and children, and affect us in one way or the other eventually. And so this campaign against extremism is something that we can all find common cause on, and we invite you to join us in countering every form of extremism. Jazakallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Imam Rizwan, for walking us through those 11 points of our campaign. As the Imam pointed out, the responsibility of fighting terrorism that we find amongst Muslims lies on the Muslims first and foremost. And this is why our community has launched this campaign. Just, I think about a month ago, when President Obama visited a mosque in Baltimore, he made a very important points. One of the key things that stood out with me was that he said that Muslims, you don't have to be a Muslim or an American. You should be a Muslim and an American. There's no contradiction between those two. And our community has been carrying out initiatives very similar to that support these principles. We've carried out a number of campaigns, Muslims for Loyalty, Muslims for Life, Muslims for Peace, and now, like I mentioned, this is like a culmination of those initiatives, and we will be holding a number of events around this campaign throughout the year. So, what are we asking of here? As our Imam pointed out, you don't have to be a Muslim to endorse this campaign. This is something that we all agree on, as Representative Al Green had mentioned in his address at Capitol Hill, and that no religion condones the killing of innocent people, especially Islam, where the very religion itself means peace. So it is a very ironic, very sad state that we find the world in, where a handful of extremists have the loudest voice. And this is where moderate majority of the Muslims need to stand up and present the true teachings of Islam in defense of not just Islam, but for all religions, as our Imam pointed out. So that is what we are asking in our campaign, that visit our site, trueislam.com, read those 11 points, endorse them, and then share this with others. Spread the good word amongst your friends, your neighbors, and that way we will, as together, defeat this extremist ideology that we find so often over on the East. In the next slide, I have taken out some quotes of some of the folks who have endorsed our campaign. You can read those, and please do visit our website and endorse this. I think we also have a laptop if somebody is really pumped up after listening to this, that they want to sign up right away and endorse the campaign. We have a lofty target of reaching 1 million endorsements during this year. Is that right, Usman? This year, or yeah, or in the near future, hopefully. So I guess that's our version of the Million Man March, but it's for a good cause, and we hope that you will all support that. I think with this, we will open it up to any questions anybody may have. Our Imam is always here to answer them. He can also come out to wherever you happen to be. We're in fact hoping to hold a function in the Fairfax County Government Center around the same idea, to kind of reach a different audience who can't make it out here. So we have a number of initiatives throughout the year, and this is very much a national security issue for us as we see it, because peace in the country that we live in is very important to us. So I'm very grateful that some of the police officers are here to support this. So at this point, yeah, I'll leave it open for any questions. Also, feel free to grab some cake. There's some fresh coffee or tea also. So but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and our Imam would be glad to answer that. Any questions? Maybe I can start it out myself. One of the challenges that I always think about when I hear about this campaign is that this is an inclusive campaign. Not just, like I said, for Muslims, but also non-Muslims. But as the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we have launched this. How can we, for example, get the participation of other Muslim communities first and foremost, and then perhaps other religious communities? Maybe that's something maybe Imam, you could maybe start out with.
So what we've done with this campaign is that we've presented all of the points in a way that is non-denominational, from within the perspective of Islam. In that every point is supported with references from the Holy Quran, which is universally accepted by all Muslims, and by sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, that are generally known and widely understood among Muslims. And so in this way, this campaign is something that within Islam is non-denominational, and it speaks and it represents the basic points of Islam that are important to put forward in combating the specific types of extremism that are put forward by groups like ISIS. But also, the reason why we invite other religious communities to join us as well is because we have found that those of us who are interested in religion, we have something that is common. Even though we may have different religions, but that common interest in religion is something that brings us together. And that's something that's very valuable in our society. One pinch that many people of many religious communities are feeling is people's indifference towards God and towards religion in general. And so that is a point and purpose that brings us together to a great degree. And so what we have found is that those people who are the members of other religions and churches and whatever it is, they have had the greatest amount of interest in the efforts and the campaigns that we do. And also, we as a Muslim community, we also take great interest in the issues that concern Christians and also the ideological points that sometimes arise. And so we as Muslims are also always there to reach out to our religious communities that are around us. And so this campaign is something that crosses the divides of religion and culture, and it is something that appeals to a general anti-extremism that exists as a common principle that we all share.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, maybe just a little more on, we talked about the 11 points here, and I'd be interested to, I think central to those is the family. And how does Islam view the family? How important is the centrality of the family in the community, in the country and the importance of holding that together and promoting these things that you talked about?
Well, the issues of family are not mentioned in this campaign because, fortunately, extremist groups have not attacked the family structure yet, and we hope it'll remain that way. You'd have to be the worst kind of extremist to even attack the family structure and to go against that. But the one point that this campaign does speak of is the equality, empowerment, and education of women. And that is something that is important when it comes to family because it recognizes that a marriage is a partnership between two people, two individuals. It is not a type of subjugation that is permitted with one party onto the other. And so there is equality that exists in the humanity that we all have, and in the compromise that is needed to make that family structure successful. But also, one aspect of this campaign that is very important for us on holding a family unit together is understanding that, and it's a realization that we all come to at one point or another as parents or even as children growing up, is that at one point or another we make our own decisions. And we look at our children as being people who, like our children as being a reflection of ourselves in some ways. A clean slate, and we have our own dreams and ambitions of what they will be when they grow up. But sometimes what we come to a harsh realization of is that our children are also a great extent the product of their environment. And so if we send our children into an environment that is festering with extremism, that allows a kind of play on people's fears, then a lot of times what can happen is that even this extremism can find its way into our own homes. And this is what has been witnessed many times in the ironies that happen at times where sometimes those parents who are extremely active in countering racism end up having children who get inclined in the opposite direction. Or some people who are countering political extremism, their own children go towards political extremism. So those are ironies that rarely happen, but still what we see is that when extremism happens, that it happens because people are exposed to extremism. And so to allow our children to enter into a world that promotes mutual respect and love, this campaign is extremely important. Because if we allow Islamophobia to become part of the mainstream dialogue in our country, then it is very possible that we, despite the fact that we may know better as individuals, but our children may fall prone to that type of xenophobia, that type of racism and that type of extremism that very easily appeals to those people who are weak-minded in a way and less educated about the intricacies and subtleties of life.
Just the other day, a major political candidate came on the news and said that Islam hates us, referring to America. Can you speak on that? How does Islam view the West?
So this is a question that's very interesting for those people who are, not Muslims and don't have a lot of interaction with Muslims. Is that how do Muslims feel about Donald Trump? How do we react to it? And what is our take on it? And my basic understanding and the way I look at it is that the individual is not relevant. It is the society that is what is important. Yep. Now, if a person had come forward and said these same things, perhaps 20 years ago, then it would have never been something that society would have accepted. It would have been something that would have ended that person's political career immediately. And so there have always been people who have been saying things like this. But this is the first time, or in a long time in our history as a country, where a person could get up and say things like this and continue to receive support and to not be immediately condemned. And we saw this happening, more than 50 years ago, where it was common for extreme racism and segregation type of speech to be common, and other types of extremism and closed-mindedness to be common. But we went through a period of enlightenment, and now it seems that once again as a country we may be falling into a type of darkness when it comes to inclusiveness and understanding the basic human rights of all people. So my concern is not with an individual who is saying it. There will be individuals in the future, unfortunately, and there have always been individuals in the past. But what is different right now is our mainstream acceptance of it. That there's a large section of society who is not immediately repulsed by it, but feels that he is speaking what the silent majority, perhaps, in their own words, is of the opinion of. And so that is something that we have to address. And it's something that we can only address as a community and all together. Because we all have certain members of our extended circle of friends or family, at least one person, unfortunately, if you look at the ratios, who is a little bit extremist. Maybe at dinner when the whole family gets together, when extended family gets together, somebody says something crazy. And we know that there are people out there who have opinions like that. But our responsibility as members of society is to try and prevent that type of, extremism and that type of, thought that leads to hate against people and leads to the reparation of people's rights. So that's something that we can come together on. We don't have to necessarily come together to condemn an individual. There's plenty of people already doing that. What we need to come together is condemn the thought, the origin of that thought, and also the prevalence that it has in our society presently.
Thank you very much, Mo. I think what we have also Officer Bell and his team to give a brief presentation around security of our neighborhood and so on. So I'd like to invite them.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting us to this very informative event. We in law enforcement, we recognize the struggle that Muslims are undergoing right now in the United States. And we greatly respect and appreciate the true Islam message in the 11 points. But most importantly, from a law enforcement point of view, we want to thank you for working hard in keeping the younger Muslims away from the radicalization, for standing up against the extremism. We realize it's not easy. So, in addition, something we tell all of our citizens right now, it's a campaign that's going on nationally. It's something you'll see posters on the buses and the metro and things like that as well. To see something, say something campaign. And what that means is if you see something out of the ordinary, strange, whatever it is, you let law enforcement know. Whether it's local law enforcement or federal law enforcement. In fact, I think there's even an app for that now. So, but again, if you're not sure, please let us know. Say something. Because even if we look into it and it's nothing, we'd rather know about it than miss something vital or important information. Let's see. Also, the 11 tenets that you had here, they're excellent. And we encourage you to continue to follow them and to talk about your message. It's also important to remember, and this is more for the younger people in the audience, the decisions you make today will invariably affect you tomorrow, whether it's in your private life or whether it's in your work life. One of the things I always say is think twice before you act, and sometimes speak too, that helps. My coworkers are going to also speak to you about more interactions with law enforcement, but the one thing I would really like you guys to take away from tonight is that we do understand in today's political climate of hyperpolarization that there are sensitivities facing the Muslim community right now. And as much as we wish we could change people's perception, we can't. And when you do have an encounter with the police department, please be patient, please be cooperative, and so the encounter can end quickly and easily. I'll let these guys explain further, and again, thank you for having us here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I'll speak. I'm Lieutenant Stern. I'm the ship supervisor. I'm here on behalf of the commander of the Sully District Station. If you guys have any questions about police procedure or law enforcement in general, we're glad to field them. So, right ahead.
You mentioned say, if you see something, say something. Is there like a number, phone number, or just call 911? What is it?
Certainly, if it's an emergency, call 911. I don't have the number in front of me for
the non-emergency number is, we don't have handouts for it, but it's 703-691-2131.
Yep.
It's basically any local law enforcement, wherever you may be. Like I said, it's a national campaign. It doesn't matter if you're in college or if you're at work or whatever it is. You can also go online. I think if you Google, say something, see something, we'll give you more information on how to contact that as well. Like I said, I actually do think there is an app for that now. So.
Yes, sir. Question that if you see a suspicious person, and you want to check whether that person is suspicious or under surveillance, is there any way we can do that, or no? Like, say, if we see somebody in the mosque who is very suspicious, so how we can find out, like, is there any option that we can check whether that person is under surveillance?
Well, certainly if you find somebody acting suspiciously and you want to report it, you can do that anonymously, and then we can follow up. Otherwise, like I said, just a case-by-case basis. I mean, that's such a broad and vague, circumstance. I'm not sure exactly how I could answer that.
If I can interject,
Go ahead.
if somebody's under surveillance or being investigated for something, most likely we're not going to tell you because we don't want that kind of information to leak out if there's some bigger investigation going on. We don't want that person finding out that, hey, the police are on to them. But if you do have somebody that's roaming around the mosque, roaming around town, your house, your neighborhood, shopping centers, whatever you see that may just seem out of place, something not normal, you can always call either 911 if it's emergency or that 691 2131 number for non-emergencies and just let them know. You can always, you don't ever have to give a phone number or your name, just give a location, brief description of the person, and we'll come out and we'll try to find the person and talk to them and figure out if something is wrong with them or what needs to be done.
Thank you. So what's the best way to communicate with the station on a regular basis?
Say your last part of your question again.
So what's the best way to communicate with the Sully District Station on a regular basis?
Well, certainly you can get on the email chain website for the Sully Station. You can email the commanders, and they can disseminate through the station and get you the exact information you need. Okay, check our website. Anything else?
One more question. I don't know whether you can have, I know that the situation is becoming more and more tense because of the elections. Is there anything like you put like surveillance cameras, hidden cameras that you can?
That's a valid point there. As a police department, we're not going to be surveilling polling places. We don't want to be setting up there to perhaps discourage or encourage voters of a particular candidate. So by our policy, we're not going to be surveilling the polling places. And I'm not sure if there is a state code that applies to that. I know that when you're in a voting machine, that's definitely not being surveilled. But certainly if something is concerning to you at a polling place, go talk to the staff at the polling place and their procedures that we already have prepared to deal with that. Okay? That's the best way we can tell you. But we're not going to be out in front of a polling place, just standing around. Okay? Yes, sir.
So just on a local level in this area, what are the biggest challenges that you see in the community? Just at large, not a particular person.
Other than traffic?
So we've become aware of what, sort of the perspective of what's happening in the community.
From what I know of, and I've been at the Sully Station for nearly a year now, from Mount Vernon, it seems that property crime, larcenies from vehicles, is epidemic proportions out here. Don't leave anything in your car, and don't leave your car unlocked. Even loose change is a target, and it's not worth getting your window broken for somebody stealing the loose change. Okay? Anything, just get it out of the car, bring it inside, laptops. Still have GPSs, I guess, on windshields, that stuff. Cell phones, don't leave it in the car.
Thank you.
Anything add to that?
Well, I guess the big problem that we have out here is that, criminals are smart. So they come out here, they commute out here to commit all their crimes, because you have these big neighborhoods. They can hit a lot of neighborhoods in a short period of time, and then they're back to wherever they came from. So, and that's where, if you notice something weird going on in your neighborhood, that's when you should give us a call. And, you want to make sure that you explain, where this is occurring, get the best description of the vehicle or the people that you can, so that when we arrive, we have the best chance of locating whatever you think is suspicious.
Remember, we're a 24/7 service, okay? So even if you're up at 2 in the morning for whatever reason and you see somebody walking down the street that looks like this, right? Call us. You can at least come and say hi, check him out, and if he's good, he's on his way. But you can always call us anytime for pretty much any reason.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, officers. It's great to have you guys just next door to us, you know, next to our mosque. I also want to recognize a few folks. First and foremost, we have Supervisor Kathy Smith from the Sully District. We know your predecessor very well, and we look forward to a very good future with you in our district. Also, we have a team from Sheriff Kincaid's office. Thank you so much for coming as well. And then I'd also like to recognize Mr. Ellis Robbins, who is representing Congressman Jerry Connolly here. So it's great to have this representation. Thank you so much for joining us. And, we look forward to having more events like this. At this time, I'd like to request our Imam to lead us in silent prayer, which will conclude the program, but absolutely stick around, have some coffee, tea, some cake, and chit-chat as long as you like. So, Imam.
Please join in silent prayer.